Undercover boss orders, eggs at his own café, freezes when waitress complains she barely makes rent. Under the soft morning sunlight, a gentle breeze swept across the wooden awning of a small cafe, tucked into a corner street, a place with a clean storefront, a bright signboard, and a steady stream of people coming and going like the steady breath of a busy morning. On the surface, the cafe seemed to offer nothing to complain about. Neatly arranged tables, professionally smiling staff, and food arriving promptly. But to Michael Carter, CEO of the Sunrise Cafe chain Years of Instinct, whispered something else. This morning, he wasn't wearing a suit. No expensive watch. Just a man in his 50s in a worn flannel shirt, a low baseball cap shading half his face, stepping into the cafe like a stranger hoping to escape city noise. He chose the table by the window, ordered a strong espresso, and slowly flipped through the menu not to pick a dish, but to pick a vantage point. This branch, according to reports, was listed as one of the most stable locations in the system. Consistent revenue, positive reviews, all KPIs met on time. But some things don't show up in reports. An unusually high turnover rate, staff resigning without clear reasons, a few internal remarks about a lack of fairness, but vague, never specific. Michael was done searching for answers through spreadsheets. He wanted to hear with his own ears, see with his own eyes, and perhaps, this morning, this little cafe would offer him more than just an espresso. It would show him what the numbers never said. If you believe these truths deserve to be shared, hit subscribe now, because we still have many untold stories. Michael sat quietly at the table by the window, gently rotating his now slightly cooled espresso cup. His sunny side-up eggs arrived within 5 minutes, perfectly soft-centered, toast lightly crisp, everything textbook, just as his own training program prescribed. The one who brought the food was a young woman, thin build, hair tied low, uniform tidy, but with slightly frayed sleeve cuffs. Her name tag, pinned neatly on the left chest, Sarah. "Thank you," he said softly, and just as she was about to turn away, he asked gently in the tone of a polite guest, showing concern, "How's your morning shift going?" Sarah paused for a beat. She turned, forcing a smile, the kind of polite smile from someone long used to hiding fatigue behind the expectations of a smile-always workplace. "It's okay," she replied, and then almost involuntarily, eyes drifting toward the window. "It's just, I can barely afford rent anymore. And food, well, I'll deal with that later." A sentence as light as the wind, but to Michael, it pierced straight into the deepest part of him, his faith in the very system he had built. Sunrise had once prided itself on ensuring that every employee was protected with minimum tip coverage, clear work hours, and benefits policies aligned with reality. But that one sentence short, without complaint, stirred a familiar question within him. Had something been twisted beneath the surface of this stable operation? Michael didn't ask any further. He didn't react then. He simply looked down, gently broke a piece of toast, as if enjoying his breakfast. But in truth, he had begun an investigation. Because a server who can't even feed herself within the system he created is not a small issue. It's the beginning of a reckoning with conscience. There are injustices that don't scream. They repeat silently, subtly, until the harmed begin to believe it's normal. All that morning, Michael never left the window-side table. He sipped his coffee slower than usual, watched more carefully, and memorized every small detail, like how Sarah would slightly lean forward when apologizing for a delayed order, or how she would clean up a table without being told. Sarah did the most, no measurement needed. She was the first to carry trays out of the kitchen, the last to stoop down and wipe the edge of a table after a customer left. She remembered every order without writing. She knew how to calm a situation, an undercooked egg, a poorly frothed milk. But the thing Michael noticed most was what she never did. Every time a customer nodded for the bill, Sarah stepped back half a step. The POS device, which confirms transactions and records digital tips, was never in her hands. Instead, Ryan or Kyle would step in smoothly, naturally, as if by reflex, despite having never served that table. They operated the system quickly, smiled at the customer, pressed confirm, and per the system, all digital tips were recorded under their names. Michael didn't ask. He simply touched the now cool coffee cup, then quietly left the cafe at the end of the shift. At the central operations office, Michael logged into the management system using founder-level access. He typed the command to retrieve POS access permissions for cafe branch number 24. The first line appeared clearly, Sara M. access, denied. Note, pending reevaluation of performance during peak hours. Last updated, 5 months ago. Final approver, Greg H., branch manager. Michael opened the internal training records. Post-training course, Sarah M. Status, completed. Grade, excellent. A. Final evaluator, Kyle D., nephew of branch manager Greg H. A closed loop. The trainer was the nephew. The evaluator was the daily POS operator. The one who blocked access the uncle. The one excluded was the person who worked the hardest. Michael opened the 30-day tip distribution chart. Sarah served nearly 60% of total tables. POS operations, 0. Tips recorded, 0%. Ryan and Kyle served less than 25%, but executed over 85% of POS transactions, receiving nearly 90% of all digital tips at the branch. Michael sat still, closing the laptop softly, not because the report was done, but because everything was already too clear. Everything followed procedure. Everything had signatures. And that was exactly what made it terrifying. A system that seemed fair now legally distorted through internal decisions and presumed access rights. Sarah, the only one still holding on to dedication, was being excluded from the system by pre-programmed silence. And Michael knew justice doesn't need to be rewritten. It just needs to be restored. Michael didn't act immediately. He knew that if he wanted to fix things at the root, the most important thing right now wasn't making a decision, but listening to one more voice. That evening, he returned to the branch for a very simple reason. Forgot to get the receipt for breakfast. The cafe had only a few remaining customers. Sarah was cleaning the espresso machine, her hair tied up high, her shoulders drooping slightly after a long shift. Michael stood near the counter, waiting for a moment when no one was paying attention. He quietly asked, "This morning, you mentioned something about rent?" Sarah was slightly startled, then gave a small smile, not defensive, not complaining, just the smile of someone used to not being asked. "I probably said too much. It's okay. I do this job because I love it. It's just that the last few months, tips have really dropped. I don't get to operate the machine, so any card tips from customers never reach me." A simple sentence. But to Michael, it cut deep into a belief he had once held firmly, that if a system was built transparently enough, then fairness would follow naturally. He thanked Sarah, took the receipt, and walked out, but this time, in his mind, was a completely new blueprint for how the system must be restructured. The next morning, in the regional executive boardroom, Michael pulled up a slide. On the screen, Café Branch 24, current tip-sharing model, exploited by closed power structures. He broke it down. POS operation had been treated as a reward instead of a responsibility tied to actual service. The hardest-working employees weren't given access to the tools that logged and recognized their work. Management used access rights to preserve personal benefits for their own relatives. And finally, he said, "We don't need to change the system. We just need to change how those in power are using it." Michael ended the meeting by issuing an emergency audit order for all regional branches covering 1. POS access rights, 2. Actual service ratio versus recorded tips, 3. Any transaction where the person operating the POS doesn't match the actual server must be accompanied by a documented internal explanation. And for Cafe Branch, Vincate, he made a decision. He would return on Friday morning not for breakfast, but to restart a kind of justice that didn't need to be shouted, but ran deep enough so that good people would no longer be ignored. Some mornings don't begin with coffee, but with a truth that can no longer be hidden. Friday, 7:46 a.m. Cafe Sunrise, branch number 24, like every other day, the lights were on and the place was bustling. The aroma of espresso wafted gently. The POS machine beeped rhythmically after each swipe. Ryan was behind the counter, Kyle laughing with an elderly female customer. Sarah had just carried 2 cappuccinos to table, 3 her steps brisk but steady, as if trying to catch up with something invisible. And then, the door opened. No one turned around, until 3 people in white shirts, each with a Sunrise HQ name badge, walked in like a statement. Following them was Michael Carter, no longer in a cap, no longer in the light gray flannel shirt from before. Just himself, CEO, founder with an expression no longer patient. Doug, the branch manager, looked up. The shift schedule sheet in his hand froze midair. "Mr. Carter, I didn't." "You won't need to say anything," Michael cut in. His voice wasn't loud, but clear enough that every spoon clink and every customer greeting came to a halt. He gave a slight nod. An auditor stepped forward and connected a laptop to the screen behind the counter. Where images of new pastries usually played, now appeared the truth. 30-day transaction breakdown. Sarah M. Tables served. 59%. POS usage, null. Digital tips, null. Ryan D. Tables served. 8%. Pause usage. 61%. Tips received. 42%. Kyle D. Tables served. 12%. Pause usage. 24%. Tips received. 38%. Next. Internal email subject. Do not grant access to Sarah. Letting Sarah operate pause would distort the weekly tip report. She hasn't complained, so just keep it as is. Ryan knows the customers quicker on the POS. If Sarah serves, we'll just pool and divide later. Don't let her see the POS reports. The entire cafe fell silent like the air had been sucked out. Sarah stood frozen next to table 3. The empty tray in her hand trembled slightly, but her eyes for the first time did not look away. Michael stepped forward. He didn't look at Doug. He didn't look at the screen. He looked directly at where everyone was standing. We don't need a system that excludes people. But today, I see, it has been used to do exactly that. And he turned toward Doug, who was swallowing hard, eyes fixed on the floor. You didn't make a mistake. You legitimized it. And you made it so the best employee here had no chance of being seen. Michael looked at Ryan and Kyle. Both had just set the POS devices down, hands still trembling. You operated the system, that's not wrong. But you did it when you weren't the one who served. And you received, while the real server stood waiting outside the system. He gave a signal. 3 envelopes were handed over by the auditor. Immediate termination notices, no further inspection required. No objections. No explanations. Only silence, deep and cold, from everyone left standing. Michael stepped forward again. From today on, Sunrise will operate according to its original values. Every act of service will be recorded. Every POS transaction shown in real time. All tips transparent, with no middlemen, no more arbitrary pooled sharing. End quote. No more power based on connections. And no more exclusions just because someone doesn't know the right people. He paused, then directed one final look toward Sarah, still standing, empty tray in hand. And you. His voice lowered, slowly, deliberately. Thank you for not giving up, even before we realized we had turned our backs. Sarah didn't cry, but her eyes overflowed, not from surprise, but because finally a regular person, during a regular shift, was finally seen. There are truths that don't need agreement. They just need someone brave enough to stop turning away. The cafe stayed silent. An elderly guest put down their spoon on a plate of pancakes, then looked toward the counter. A new staff member bowed deeply, their hands trembling slightly above an untouched order tray. In that frozen stillness, Sarah seemed like the only one still standing tall. Even though all this time, she was the one who always had to bow. Michael turned toward the digital display. On the screen, the data remained dry, but clearer than any explanation. He signaled to the second auditor, who was holding a handheld control device linked to the system. At that very moment, a new command line appeared. Update POS access. Sarah M. Full access. Effective. Immediately. Transaction display. Enable real time. And then, for the first time since the cafe had opened that morning, something truly shifted. Not the sound of the POS machine, but the whispers between staff. She's got her access back. Really? Look at the board, her name's up there now. Sarah turned toward the digital board. For the first time, she saw her name not on the shift roster, not in some internal notebook, but on the very screen that had once shut her out of the system. Sara M. Dos. Active. A name lit up, not large, not flashy, but a statement no one could erase again. Michael turned back, his voice lower but gentler. You don't need to bow your head for tips anymore. From now on, the system will bow if it fails to recognize the right person. Doug said nothing. Ryan and Kyle stood still. But the shadows of power that had loomed over this system had now receded, like a chapter closed. Michael nodded to the audit team. We're not rewriting the rules. We're just restoring the house that was built on decency. Oh, he turned to Sarah once more, not to instruct, not to affirm, only to see her in the truest sense. And Sarah, she didn't smile just yet, didn't say thank you. She simply placed the tray on the counter and stood tall. Morning light filtered through the front window, casting a soft glow across her new name badge. SARHM, Pause Access, Active Staff. No more words were needed, because some truths, when finally put back in the right place, speak for themselves. Fairness doesn't come from promises. It comes from change that lasts long enough to become something no one has to fight for anymore. 1 month later, Sunrise Cafe, branch number 24, opens early as usual. But the atmosphere is no longer the same. There are no more quiet glances after each customer swipes their card. No one has to step back to let someone else use the machine. At the center counter, a digital board glows with the words, "A live tip display, real-time, transparent, equal." Each transaction now clearly displays server's name, time, recorded tips. No more wait until the weekend. No more pool it and divide later. Only a simple but necessary affirmation. I am here, and my effort is seen. Sarah steps out from behind the counter. Gone is the old apron. Now, she wears the new assistant manager uniform with deep navy blue trim, pinned firmly to the left of her chest. Sarah, Monsieur, Assistant Manager. Her hair is tied neatly in a high bun. Her steps aren't faster than before, but they are steadier, more grounded. And her eyes no longer avoid customer stares, no longer lower before the POS machine. At the window-side table, the very spot where a painful truth was uncovered a month ago, sits Michael Carter. No notebook, no assistant. Just a customer ordering his usual black coffee. Sarah approaches. She places the cup down, but doesn't speak right away. She looks at him this time not to ask for another chance, but to affirm that the one she got was not wasted. This morning's breakfast, she says softly, is no longer one where I barely survive on tips. I only needed one chance. Thank you for seeing that. Michael doesn't reply. He lifts his cup and nods slightly. The coffee tastes the same, but today it carries a new aftertaste. Not just the boldness of roasted beans, but the clarity of a system that has relearned how to listen. Sarah turns away and returns to her work, not to endure, but to help operate a space where everyone knows their effort has a place, a name, and a value. Sarah had only taken a few steps when a young employee approached her, still holding an empty tray. "Miss Sarah," he said softly, "the tip I just processed, my name showed up on the board right away. I've never seen my name light up like that." Sarah paused. She smiled but didn't speak immediately. In her eyes was the deep understanding of someone who had once stood exactly where he stood once, hoping to see her name just once, but never did. She simply nodded, gently, "Because now you're standing in the right place, and the system has finally chosen to stand with the right people." At the adjacent counter, an older customer turned to his friend, pointed to the tip display board, and said with satisfaction, "I like this. No more ambiguity. The one who brought me my coffee is the one who gets acknowledged. That's how it should be." The air in the cafe now held more than the aroma of fresh coffee. It carried the scent of a system that had been cleansed. Michael remained seated at his usual table. In front of him, a black coffee, no sugar. In front of Sarah, a new team being shaped by principles that didn't need to be printed on the wall, but etched into how they worked. He watched as she guided two new staff members, showing them how to check the real-time display, instructing them on POS procedures with calm but clear confidence. No lofty speeches. No need to inspire. Because now recognition is the default, not a privilege. Michael took a slow sip, letting the warmth of the coffee spread through his mouth. Not to wake up, but to feel. This cup of coffee wasn't just made by a machine. It was poured by a space that had rewritten itself. From the shift schedule, to POS access, to the way a new manager chose to defend fairness not through theory, but through small, repeated actions, day after day. On the digital board, Sarah's name still appeared, not frequently since she no longer served tables directly, but every time she supported a table or guided a POS transaction, the system recorded, Sarah M. Assist POS, tips confirmed, uno. Sijawu. Another employee named Jasmine saw that line appear and tilted her head slightly. "But Sarah's a manager now, and she still gets tips?" Another team member responded, "It's not about getting, it's about being acknowledged. She still works. She still gets seen. That's all." Sarah smiled, because she understood. Fairness isn't about being prioritized. It's about this: wherever you are, if you do the work, you will not be erased. Fairness doesn't come from a payroll sheet. It doesn't live in Monday meetings. It shows up line by line, transaction by transaction, glance by glance. And when someone who was once forgotten is finally seen, the entire system will never be the same again.